Stream on in. As you may have just heard an alert, we are recording this meeting for posterity's sake and to make it accessible to those folks who can't otherwise attend the meeting this evening. It's great to have you here. We'll get started here momentarily. Thank you for joining us tonight. We'll get started here in one more minute, and then we'll get on with the show. I guarantee you at least a solid hour of entertainment. The last half hour, I was kind of questionable. We'll see what happens. But the first half hour is going to be amazing. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I appreciate you being here. My name is Ryder Smith. I have the honor and opportunity to work with the City of Cerritos and Robert Lopez, your city manager, and the team at the city manager's office on a range of communication issues and opportunities to engage the public and talk about civic engagement and tackling local government problems and challenges in the great state of California. Tonight, we're engaging in our second community workshop discussion about the city's budget and finances. And part of the goal this evening is to help turn you all into little miniature finance directors. I'll draw your attention. Tonight's meeting is going to be a more informal format. So the effort is to make city staff experts like your city manager, Robert here, who I'll have introduce himself in a second, available to answer questions and get those questions answered on the spot where we can. Or if we can't get the question answered, we will take a note of it and circle back and get that question answered for you. But there is a feature at the bottom that allows you to submit Q&A. I will also just note we had the ability for the community to submit questions ahead of time, and we actually had several community members submit questions. So when we start out this evening, I'll be referencing some of those questions to kick us off for our Q&A phase on this. But we'll have about 30 or 40 minutes of presentation time, and then we'll get into the Q&A time. With that, I just want to pause for a second and ask my co-host here to come on and introduce himself. Robert Lopez, city manager. Tell me about who you are, what you're all about, what you do for the great people of Cerritos.
Thank you, Ryder. Good evening, everybody. My name is Robert Lopez, and I'm proud to serve as the city manager of Cerritos. I've been in this role since 2023, and I've been a long time employee of the city for over 24 years. I'm also a longtime resident. I grew up here in Cerritos, and I'm honored to continue to live here and raise my family here. I work with a great team of employees who provide all sorts of services for the city. And tonight, we're pleased to help educate our community on our budget and finances and look forward to the conversation.
Perfect. Thanks, Robert. I appreciate it. It's very, as I like to note to folks when I get the pleasure of introducing you, there are not too many cities that get to claim the city manager, A, living within the city limits, and B, having grown up and been a part of the community for so long. So it's unique, rare, and speaks to why Cerritos is a special place. All right. So as I said, our goal tonight is kind of help folks become little miniature finance directors of sorts and at least get to know the city government budget pretty well. Local government's a complex process. It can be a complex budget. And the goal is to remove some of that mystery and answer questions and generally bring folks along for the ride in the conversation. So we're going to go over a city finance overview. You'll probably hear me talk about some of this stuff mostly tonight, and then I'll throw it to Robert for a couple things. And I'm also confident that where I stumble, Robert will quickly intervene and be my safety net tonight to make sure I don't botch it too horribly. So fundamentally, city governments are responsible for maintaining critical services like, as many of you know, public safety, where your LA County Sheriff contract, or clean water supplies. You have a water utility in the city that's provided by the city. Not all cities provide water, but Cerritos does. Some cities have electric utilities. Cerritos has an electric utility. Almost every city has sidewalks of some form, and they have to maintain those sidewalks, maintain the streets. And some cities offer library services, and they have parks and rec programming. These are pretty common things, but a huge swath of the California population lives in cities, and cities provide all the day-to-day basic services that those residents tend to come to love. When you run a city government, you have two forms of kind of funding that exist inside the organization. There's the general fund, So the general fund is your day-to-day money that you use for running the operations of the city, supporting Parks and Rec programming, supporting your public safety operations, your police department, or in this case, a sheriff contract, running the library, things of that nature. And then you have what are called enterprise funds. And enterprise funds are designed as like miniature standalone businesses that are intended to operate internal to the city, delivering services to residents for a fee of service. So an enterprise fund, most commonly known or example, is a water department, where the water department has water utility rates. They charge those rates. And in a best practice, the water utility rates cover the cost of not only the water services that are delivered and the electricity it takes to deliver and the people it takes to deliver and the maintenance staff it takes to deliver, but also to replenish the capital plant or set aside funds that are necessary to fund capital investments to replace wells and to replace pipes and to replace all the hardware investments that is necessary to run an enterprise fund. The city has several enterprise funds, but the biggest one that operates for the city is the water fund. And as I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about tonight, the city recently had to go through some water rate increases to right the fund, so to speak, because it had been running in deficit spending for quite some time and supported by general fund dollars. And as a best practice, the city was squaring that up and trying to resolve funding, capital investment funding for the future of the water department as well. Cities, when they have excess funds, they have savings. So this is like your savings account. When the city has a savings account, they will have a reserve fund policy. This is established by the city council, and the general guidelines are to identify how much extra savings we would like to have in the bank, ready to be able to tap into when a crisis happens or there's a problem where we want to stabilize our finances. So just like you would have a checking account and then you'd probably have a money market account for your extra savings. It's how much money do you have sitting in those savings accounts that are set aside for the rainy day, so to speak, or there to help you fund major one-time capital funds. There are typically clear guidelines that are provided by the council that include minimum, max, and target reserves that they want to hold aside. And these are often designed around kind of general best practices for municipalities, as well as their own special nuance. And it's usually measured, frankly, in terms of like comparison to the general fund budget. And then when you do have those excess funds, you want to make sure that they're strategically allocated to priorities like infrastructure or long-term liability payoffs, or maybe a one-time need that comes up. What you don't want to end up doing is committing to expenditures that are going to be recurring annual expenditures that over time will drain that reserve fund, essentially meaning you're operating in a deficit environment, because as we know, that is not economically sustainable for the city. And as I mentioned, you will typically have a capital improvement plan funding. So essentially what this is you look at as a city, and cities are designed to go forever, and they need to make major capital investments like in streets, in pipes, in buildings, and equipment. And in order to support capital improvement plans, they have to have funds set aside to look to the future and have the money ready to go when you need to replace that equipment. So, for example, if if you have, for your example, is for your home, if you know you have a roof that's you're going to have to replace in 15 years, you would start trying to have some money set aside or build up some reserves so that in 15 years you could finance the replacement of that roof, or at least begin the down payment on the payment of that roof and then finance the rest of it with a loan. Similar for cities, they want to be able to have capital available to make major investments in new infrastructure, new buildings, new services that require physical plant investments, one-time physical plant investments, and those are part of the capital improvement plan. So those are just the high-level basics that I would encourage you to be familiar with in terms of terminology. At this point, I actually want to hand it over to Robert. One of the great things is Robert's been in the city for a while. He knows the history and background because even though he's far younger than me, he is familiar with some of these eras of the city. So, Robert, why don't you walk us through a little financial history of the uniqueness that is City of Cerritos?
Yes, thank you, Ryder. So for those of us who've lived in Cerritos a long time, you've probably heard about or read about the Cerritos Redevelopment Agency. The redevelopment agency has been in place since the early 1970s, and it was part of a larger state program called redevelopment that allowed local cities to divert property tax revenue that would normally have gone to the county and to retain it and use it locally for infrastructure and other capital projects. The city had redevelopment since the early 1970s, and it was instrumental in funding several projects that our residents would appreciate, not only our water and sewer infrastructure, but also many of our parks and playgrounds, our community buildings, and our landscaped park-like streets, including the medians and parkways. Much of that was funded in part by redevelopment. This is a program that was intended to be used for elimination of blight and also economic development. And it's what enabled Cerritos to transform from a dairy community into our world-class community that we have today. During the 1970s and 80s, the city heavily relied on redevelopment, not only to build out the projects I mentioned, but also to facilitate the development of key commercial areas. These include the Cerritos Auto Square and also the Cerritos Town Center. Many residents may not be aware, but the Cerritos Town Center is actually owned by the city. 160 acres that make up the town center. We own the dirt, and we have leased the area to developers who built the buildings and own the buildings, and pay us a significant amount of revenue annually to occupy that space. So not only has our redevelopment been important in helping to build out our retail commercial areas, which generate sales tax, and our hotel also generates bed tax, but we also get direct revenue from leases from those properties. In addition to the town center, we also own other properties in the city, including a couple of dealership properties in the Auto Square. We own Lincoln Station, which is the shopping center where Sprouts Market is located, as well as some industrial properties in the city. Um, so the redevelopment was successful for the city and enabled us to do a lot of projects. We were basically able, because we were able to use redevelopment funds for those projects, it allowed the general fund that Ryder mentioned to be used for other things, such as services and programs, including public safety, senior services, and recreation services, among others. Unfortunately, in late 2011, early 2012, the state of California abolished the redevelopment program. So cities in California throughout the state instantly lost the revenue that was flowing in at the time. And in Cerritos, at the height of redevelopment, we were receiving approximately $30 million a year in redevelopment revenue. That was $30 million that we were able to use toward key projects. All of a sudden, we were found without that source and had to still operate and carry on the city's business, which is why in 2014, the city made efforts to address our water rates, water and sewer rates as enterprise funds that Ryder had mentioned. And that helped a little, but wasn't enough in the long term to help our enterprise funds be whole. And also, we still were left with a big hole in the budget that resulted from the loss of redevelopment. Ryder, if you can go to the next slide, please. Fast forward a little bit to 2020, we all know what happened with the onset of COVID, and many services and programs were shut down temporarily. But the interesting thing that happened during COVID is because folks were no longer going on vacation, they were no longer spending their um, revenue or their income on experiences, they were instead spending their money on goods. So we actually saw for some time in the year or two following the onset of COVID, we saw a little spike in our sales tax revenue because many people were choosing to spend money at our local stores. We also all experienced a little bit of influx in funding from the federal government individually, and many people were using those stimulus funds right here in Cerritos. So for a short time, the city benefited from a little increase in sales tax revenue, but by 2023, that had gone down to baseline levels. So we're back kind of in our normal, a flattening, if you will, of sales tax revenue. I alluded earlier to our water fund, and in 2011 and 2012, when redevelopment ended, we had to still fund our water operation. That's a health and safety issue, and we want to make sure we provide safe and clean water to all of our residents and our businesses. Because our water operation needed to continue, wherever we had a gap between revenues received from the ratepayers and the cost of running the water and sewer operations, our general fund made the gap. And for a while, that was hopefully going to be a short-term need. But over time, the cost of providing the water services continued to rise while revenues remained relatively flat. And in 2023, the gap that had accumulated between the revenues and expenditures that was made up through a general fund loan had amounted to several million dollars, several dollars that the water fund would not be able to pay back to the city. And so in 2023, the city made a decision to forgive that loan, and with the plan also that we would adjust our water and sewer rates so that future expenses would be made up through ratepayer revenues. That action finally took place in 2026, beginning of this year. Water and sewer rates were adjusted, and over the next 5 years, the subsidy of our enterprise funds, the water and sewer funds, the subsidy by the general fund will diminish over time. So that's what we're in the middle of implementing. And looking up in the future in 2028, I mentioned redevelopment ended in 2011, but for a number of years, the city has been able to collect a smaller amount of former redevelopment revenue because of a loan that the city had made to the redevelopment agency. That loan, we've been getting a certain amount every year of former redevelopment funds. That last loan payment back from the former redevelopment agency to the city will happen in 2028. And after that, the city is going to see an additional drop in revenue following that last loan repayment. So while the city grew and has become successful because of a very beneficial funding source in the form of redevelopment, over the past 15 years, we have been dealing with that sudden loss in revenue and have been working to try to find other ways to make up that revenue so we can continue to provide the services and programs that the city of Cerritos has expected over the past decades of development. And
Thank
with
you, Robert.
that, I'll turn the floor back to Ryder.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate that summary. The history there is important, particularly because Cerritos was probably one of the more effective local government agencies at using redevelopment agencies to build out the community, convert the entire community from ag land into the multifamily or into the housing and commercial juggernaut that it is today. And so it was, just distinctly successful, which meant the end of redevelopment was perhaps more significant to Cerritos than it was to other cities that had not been as successful in using that particular state program. And I just think that's kind of a notable point of history about Cerritos that doesn't have an impact. All right, that is some great context for a conversation a little bit about where we are today. I just want to talk real quick about where the city receives money from and where they spend the revenue that they get today. So on the whole, for fiscal year 25-26, the revenue totals for the city are just over $138 million. You'll see this term general fund. You should be familiar with that from prior slide that we discussed. 101,000 of that is revenues that are supporting the general fund. But then you'll see, say, enterprise funds down at 22 million, and a significant portion of that enterprise fund revenue, I believe, is the water agency or the water service department that you run at the city. So that's funding an enterprise operations of the enterprise fund. And then you'll see additional revenues that are identified here that are less significant than some of those big ones. Could you talk real quick, Robert, about the special revenue funds, the 14 million? Sorry, I don't mean to distract. call you out. The 14 million that's on the special revenue funds, Robert. That can you remind me what that item is?
Yes, thank you, Ryder. Special revenue funds are help to provide revenue to the city from various sources. These include some grants and primarily grants and other miscellaneous sources.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then on an overview basis, so of that general fund revenue we talked about, so that 101 million we had in the prior slide, what makes up that 101 million? Well, sales tax is the big one. Cerritos has been very successful in developing the Cerritos Auto Mall and the Los Cerritos Center. So the shopping mall combined with that, combined with just Cerritos being a lovely place to have some good food and visit, drives significant sales tax revenue. It imports a lot of consumers who like to come to the area and shop. And the result of that is sales tax revenues are a significant chunk of revenue for the city. Of that 43.8 million, about 80% of that sales tax is actually paid by people who are visiting the city, not necessarily the residents themselves. So these are people who are coming to Cerritos Auto Mall to buy a car, or coming to the mall to buy a dress at Nordstrom's or some such thing. Um, You'll also see use of money in property revenues. Those are focused on either lease payments for the land that Robert referred to, or building lease payments, or it's interest income off of monies that the city has. And then you'll see, say, current fees and services. So these are fees that are being charged for certain fees that the city is currently collecting. So if you pay a fee to use some Parks and Rec programming, or you're paying fees to attend a theater show or things along those lines, those tend to be the fees, or these might be fees that are paid by a developer who's got to pay permit fees or things along those lines. And those are all somewhat, depending upon the nature of the fee, there are guidelines about how you can charge those fees and what those fees are supposed to look like. So, and then over on the expense side, we have an expenditure of 131 million identified here. And you'll see that this breaks down between public works, community safety, and admin services, and goes on down the line. Of note of these expenditure totals, public works tends to dominate because there's a lot of very expensive capital projects that go on there, and just a very expensive maintenance. So, for example, maintaining the trees that are in the incredible parkways that line the major arterials in Cerritos is expensive. Hence, that's where those funds go. Maintaining buildings, expensive. You have some lovely buildings. That's where those funds go towards. Community safety, this is primarily dominated by your LA County Sheriff contract. The city of Cerritos contracts out for sheriff services, like a huge number of contract cities in LA County, and rely on the sheriff deputies to help patrol the streets every day in Cerritos. That is a signed contract the city has in place, and also is further enhanced by having a police station in the city as well that those deputies operate out of. And then it just goes on down the line for other programming and service areas where funds are spent. I will also just reference 2 points for the audience. Number one, this whole PowerPoint deck will make available online on the Cerritos website at the baseline URL/future. And number two, if you pick up any materials right now that the city has available in the city budget, you'll see all these documents that are identified there as well. So they're easy to go find these graphics. Now, the city has been doing some long-term financial projections, which they are smart to do because cities should be around forever and you should look deep into the future. And the city's finance team has worked through a projection of where the city is currently at with its ongoing operating general fund and where its expenses and revenues are tracking. And it is currently running deficit expenditures, which means we are spending down our general fund reserves. You'll note this little kind of green line with a flag on it. This is actually noting what Robert had referred to earlier, which is the end of repayments from the redevelopment agency to the city that's helping offset some of the redevelopment activity. And those funds are going to be coming to an end and having an even more dramatic impact going into 29-30 in terms of the city's revenues that are available to fund operations. What you're generally seeing on this line is essentially looking at current expending rates today and then just projecting it forward, looking at historical trends of expenses that are incurred by the city and operational expenses for the city and adjusting for inflation and things along those lines. And so what we've been able to identify through the finance team is that over the next 10 years, there's about an $11.8 million gap. So that's basically summing up all the area in gray, averaging, I should say, summing up and dividing by 10, but averaging over the 10-year period, all these, the amount of money that the city is essentially running an operating deficit with. So proactively, the city is trying to look at this and figure out how do we make tweaks and adjustments to get ourselves back in line so that these are more sustainable economically, and we close that gap, or better yet, flip it so that we not only are covering our operating costs from a general fund expenditure perspective, but we're actually putting money in the bank to also support capital improvement funds that are necessary to support future investments in the city. This chart takes the current general fund balance, or the reserve, and then starts projecting, given those deficits that are looking into the out years, where do we find ourselves? And essentially by 2031, this shows that it will be our last year of having some reserves, and then we're going to go negative. And the truth is, you can't go negative on reserves. So fundamentally, something is going to have to change, and something will change one way or the other to close these gaps and make sure that the city does not default or have any other financial repercussions from having a negative reserve. And that's going to be done by your finance staff, and ultimately by the city council and the voters of, and potentially by the voters of the city of Cerritos. But this is just an important thing to talk about, because there's essentially a 4, 5, 6 year timeline here to make sure we start making some adjustments from city staff perspective to right the ship and hold us in a good position financially as we move forward for the city. So I want to talk a little bit about new revenue options or expenditure cuts, because as any time a city, and I have the opportunity to get to work in dozens and dozens of cities across California who are facing similar challenges to the city of Cerritos. And these are the two fundamental elements, just like any business. Is there an opportunity to increase revenues, or opportunity to cut services and expenditures appropriately? And so the city is looking at these things. So first thing is, I had asked the city to just help me pull together some big ticket items of what they spend money on, not because these are identified for any particular, not because these are being identified for cuts, but only because it's just helpful to understand what it costs, right? What does it cost to have services delivered in the city? Because a lot of people wouldn't know. And I think the one that is sometimes surprising for folks is looking at the fourth bullet point down there for pine tree removal and replacement, with the average cost of being $8,500 per tree, which includes both the associated curb, gutter, and sidewalk repairs. The city has over 3,800 trees in the city that remain to be kind of managed or dealt with, and that the cost to remove all those and replace all the remaining trees is already sitting at $32 million. And that's just trees alone. Now, the trees greatly enhance the driving experience, having been driving your streets a lot recently, and it is quite stunning and beautiful, but trees have a price to them. And you can see some other identified cost elements here that, again, are intended to give you a sense of what it costs to deliver services in the city of Cerritos. So fundamentally, there are options to, in the absence of adjustments, we have to reevaluate which services we're either going to curtail or defer, or figure out a plan C, I suppose, on those options, which gets a little bit murky. But fundamentally, we'd have to look at how do we maintain public safety, or do we have to cut that because it's a very large cost center for the city? Do we slow the rate at which we're maintaining our trees and do fewer tree trimmings at a certain ratio? And that has certain implications for other concerns we may have operationally and from a risk factor perspective. Do we allow our streets to deteriorate a little bit more because we aren't able to repave them as quickly as we would like? Again, that's possible to stretch that time out. But as many public works directors tell me, the more your streets go into disrepair, it gets exponentially more expensive to fix them back up and get them back up to a high quality street rating. So all these decisions offer trade-offs and things to chew on. And these are issues and challenges your city staff is working diligently on in collaboration with the city council to evaluate. The flip side to that is to look at additional revenue options. And the city staff have been directed to at least provide information and analyze what those potential revenue options might be. On your screen right now are the identified most common, typical practical revenue options that local government agencies, cities in particular, pursue in the state of California. you will see that there is a utility users tax, which the city currently does not have a tax at all. Many other surrounding cities do, but at kind of a reasonable level of taxation, you can see it would generate about a $2.5 to $4.5 million annual revenue stream. If the city were to implement its own 1% sales tax, that would provide a huge influx of $19.1 million a year. Again, I'll remind you, we have a operating deficit that we're projecting to average out to about $11.8 million a year. And then we know we'd like to have some capital reserves on top of that, theoretically. So that gives you a sense that the gap we're trying to address going forward is well in excess of $12 million a year, fundamentally, if you want to include the capital expenses or the capital investments. So that gives you some sizing about a TUT. And the reason why this number is so big is, as I said before, because the city has been so successful in driving sales tax and purchasing opportunities in the city with your mall and your auto center. It's really been a great lever for generating revenue in the city. Notably, a TUT has a slightly different structure than the standard tax that we have today. In fact, I'll just note real quick back here on my slide that right now, the sales tax rate in the city of Cerritos is 9.75%. And of that 9.75%, 1% of that actually comes to the city of Cerritos. And then the county captures 4.81 cents of that, and the state gets the other 3.94 cents. So, and to be clear, there's some portion of that 4.81 that ultimately comes to the city, a very small portion sliver that comes to the city for some additional road funds and other remit. But fundamentally, most of that sales tax that's currently paid goes out of the city and goes to fund these other government agencies. So Cerritos is effectively getting 1% of that right now. And as I mentioned, 80% of that is paid by visitors to the city. The TUT structure that's noted here for this 19.1 million, that tax is paid by folks who visit. So if they shop at Nordstrom, they would pay that tax. If they shop at the gas station, they would probably pay that tax. If they buy dinner in town, they would pay that tax. But if they go to the Cerritos Auto Mall and they buy a car, they actually import their sales tax rate from where the car is destined to be returned. And as a result, that 1% of TUT doesn't remit to the city for people who are non-Cerritos residents buying a car. The complicated point I'm trying to make is that fundamentally about just over half that tax is paid by non-Cerritos residents, people who are visiting the town shopping, and about half, and then the remaining less than 50% is paid by residents of the city of Cerritos. Other items that are considered are transient occupancy tax, which is basically a hotel tax. You currently only have one hotel, so the impact of moving from 12 to 16% is pretty de minimis. There's the possibility of doing a parcel tax. Again, many cities look at doing parcel taxes. That might raise 1.6 to 3.2 million a year, depending upon what the rate at which it's adopted and what that would mean for the city. A real property transfer tax is essentially like a sales tax just on the sale of a home, and that doesn't identify as raising significant revenues. And then finally, the city is always looking for other people's money in terms of state and federal resources to help support, bring back grant money and bring it back to the city to support operations. Robert alluded to some of that spending earlier, and that's always something the city's out trying to achieve and identify and bring back the bacon, so to speak. Now, I identified several different tax rates that are an option, or taxes that are a possibility. On the transient occupancy tax rates, Cerritos is at 12%. And you'll see where you are relative to kind of peer institutions in the area. You're towards the high side on your TOT. For the utility user tax, you're actually at 0% relative to a bunch of other agencies in the area that have some form of utility user tax. And to note, this tax is typically on all utilities, power, water, gas, and then it's also can be on cable services and some other services that would typically fall along those lines. Your cell phone bill could be a part of a UUT. And then there are sales tax rates. So Cerritos is at 9.75, which is at this point the lowest sales tax rate there is in LA County. I think there are about 20 other agencies in LA County that have a sales tax rate that's at 9.75. You'll see La Palma is in Orange County. You'll see La Mirada on there as an example of another city that has it. So essentially what that means is the city of Cerritos has not deployed its own sales tax to help fund city operations. These other cities like Norwalk, Bellflower, Hawaiian Gardens, Lakewood have all taken advantage of a TUT rate to help support their general fund budget by adopting an additional sales tax rate or a transactions and use tax TUT. Notably, too, Buena Park and La Palma have these rates that are a full percentage point lower because the county of Orange has a lower sales tax rate as a baseline in the county. It hasn't imposed taxes on the cities at the county level like LA County has imposed. And so as a result, their tax rates are actually a full percentage point lower than Cerritos because of being located outside of LA County. Now, I already talked a little bit about what the TUT is, so I won't regurgitate the details on that. But ultimately, as I note, the sales tax will be paid by residents and commuters who shop within city limits, except with the exception of if you're making major purchases like a vehicle, then the TUT rate will be imported from a shopper who is coming from whatever city they happen to live in. So if I live in Orange County, I might be actually having a lower tax rate, and that incremental 1 cent won't necessarily remit to the city. They won't even charge the 1 cent because I will have had a discount on that, or I won't have to pay that. So that's just some details about taxes, tax rates, some of those options. I think actually we'll probably end up, I'm going to guess there'll be some questions on these things, but we're going to pause right there and now turn it over to Q&A and try to get to your questions. We're doing well on schedule. I appreciate you listening to my voice drone on for a bit. Robert, is there anything I missed or I got wrong that you want to correct for the record real quick?
Thank you, Ryder. You've provided a great comprehensive overview of our financial situation. One thing I didn't mention earlier with regard to special revenues is much of those special revenues that we receive actually come from uh, county and state sources. So the state of California and the county of LA, and you alluded to this when you referenced sales tax generally, but the county and state have funds that they distribute on a formula basis to cities throughout the area. And so we do receive some form of funds from those entities, and they're restricted funds, so they're used for particular purposes. For example, we receive what are known as Proposition A and C funds. Those are specific to the operation of transit services in Cerritos. We also receive what are called Measure R and Measure M funds, and those are used for the provision of street maintenance and related activities. We also receive funds from the state that are specific to repaving streets. And again, those are formula funds that are issued to cities based on population and other factors. They are restricted, so we can't use it for general fund purposes. So, in other words, we can't use transportation money or we can't use street money to fund senior center services or recreation programs. We're limited in how those funds can be used. They are part of our overall revenue portfolio, so they're important to us. But for things like police services, sheriff's department coverage, and recreational programs, those are funded through the general fund.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. Thanks for circling back on that too. Okay, let's move into Q&A. We've had a bunch of questions submitted. I also will just remind the audience that we had the opportunity to submit questions ahead of time as well. So for all the Janie and Johnnies on the spot that wanted to get after it with their questions early, I want to make sure we get to your questions as well. The first question I have here is from Perry L. And the question is, we have a frequently asked question on the website that says the Cerritos has a sales tax rate of 9.75%, and the city keeps 1% of that total amount. Is the proposed 1% TUT additional? So the sales tax in Cerritos would be 10.75%. And Cerritos would then receive 2% of the taxes collected. Thank you. And then there was a question about whether the answer will be posted. And I think we can go ahead and make sure we get that answer posted to you. But why don't we answer that question, Robert?
Sure. So in short, with a 1% potential 1% TUT, yes, our current sales tax rate of 9.75% would go up to 10.75%, not including any other potential sales taxes that may be considered in the area. LA County currently has a sales tax measure on the ballot, and that could additionally change that amount. But based on today's numbers, a 1% TUT would move our current tax rate, sales tax rate, from 9.75 to 10.75. And for most things purchased in Cerritos, that means that we would go from 1% of revenue coming to the city to 2%. So, for example, if someone spends $1, rather than the city getting a penny, we would get 2 pennies on most goods sold in Cerritos.
There's a related kind of policy, bigger policy issue here that exists with sales tax too, Robert, that I just think this question actually opens up a clarifying point on. There is legally, there is a cap on the sales tax rate that cities can charge, or that agencies, I should say, can charge in LA County, correct?
That's correct. So currently, the state mandated cap is 10.75. So because we're currently at 9.75, we can raise our sales tax by up to 1%, 1 penny on the dollar. Other cities in the area did that several years ago. The cap used to be 10.5%. And so many cities ended up assessing a local 3/4 cent sales tax between 2020 and over the past few years. The rules have changed a little bit on that because the sales tax that makes up that total has changed. And so we are now able to capture a full penny. Santa Fe Springs, one of our neighboring cities, recently took action to capture that last 1/4%. So they are also now at 10.75%, whereas other cities in the area currently are 10.5. But yes, it's a state rule that limits local sales taxes. Some agencies are able to get a legislative exemption, meaning they lobby Sacramento and the legislature allows certain sales taxes to exceed that cap. And that's what LA County has intends to do. They have a measure in the June ballot that would add a 1/2 cent sales tax. But with that, they are seeking a legislative exemption that would still allow us to capture that full 1%, that penny on the dollar.
Yeah, and I think that exemption was pushed on, as I understand it, it was pushed on because a bunch of cities were objecting to losing out on their opportunity to capture the 1% sales tax later on, or the 1/2 cent sales tax that the county would otherwise be taking. So, in order to avoid creating a complex relationship with their cities, the county went for a legislative route to provide an exemption to their sales tax counting against the cap that exists. But I think it does speak to the kind of the race that's going on among government agencies to capture that 1% and why they're trying to pursue it and why I think a number of agencies have pursued it. So that's a policy choice. It's not me saying you should do it. It's just saying there are trade-offs to be had around that, and it's worth identifying what the opportunity cost is if somebody else swoops in and takes that 1%, so to speak, or any portion of it. All right, next question. JS asks a question, which is, how do neighboring cities manage their budgets and still provide the best services to their community? And Jay cites examples like City of Norwalk or City of Cypress.
Yeah, every city has services that they provide to their communities, and every year, staff in partnership with community members and with their city councils, they review projected revenues and look at the services that are needed or desired, and make an active decision every year to decide how to fund those services or whether to fund those services. While as cities, we provide some similar basic services, such as safe public safety and recreational programs. Several cities have specialty services and programs that are unique. And so while we share in the common goal of providing funding for what the community needs, every community looks a little bit different and has to make different decisions based on the needs and the availability of funding. For the example of the city of Norwalk, it's a much larger city than Cerritos. So some of that formula funding I referenced, because they have a larger population, have access to a greater share of some of those state and county dollars. Also, demographics is an issue. City of Norwalk has a different demographic profile than Cerritos, and in some areas it qualifies for certain federal and state grant funds that Cerritos doesn't qualify because of our demographic profile. So the revenue picture can look different, as well as the expenditure picture. City of Norwalk has a local TUT, a local sales tax that has been in place for some time. So that is another revenue source that's available at their disposal that the city of Cerritos currently doesn't have.
Thank you, Robert. All right. Another question from JS, which is there a task force of residents who have experienced managing budgets with local agencies, state agencies, for example, residents working with Metro, Caltrans that we could get input from?
And yes, in fact, the city of Cerritos convened a resident budget task force a few months ago, excuse me, a few weeks ago, at the direction of the city council. We have a group of residents, many of whom have experience in the corporate finance or public finance and are interested in helping the city, make best use of its available resources. We've had some great conversations with this task force, and the group has met with our team and our public engagement team, and will be preparing some recommendations to share with the city council in the coming weeks. The city council has also signaled interest in, over the long term, some form of committee that would, on a regular basis, look at finances, in particular, any potential new revenue source like a TUT, a local sales tax. That would be another opportunity for engagement by residents with experience in looking at finances and budgets.
And I'll just say I had the opportunity to get to facilitate the conversation for the task force that you're referring to that was convened a few weeks ago. And the meetings were scheduled for 2 hours, and each night they went for at least three, which I think is really a testament. It's either a testament to my bad facilitation or a testament to the passion that your residents have for participating. I think you would agree, Robert. They asked some very intense and consistent questions that made it an enlightening evening, and we were both thrilled with the level of passion that was there and the fact that they were willing to give up an extra hour each night just to ask questions and become little city government nerds. So it was, I think, super helpful for city staff to have that perspective, and I'm confident it'll be helpful to the city council as well. All right, next question up. Daniel B. Are we still paying for retired council members' health insurance, and if so, why?
City of Cerritos employees who are vested, meaning that they've worked for the city for a prescribed number of years and who retire, are currently eligible for health benefits at retirement. And that has been extended to city council members who do qualify, who meet certain minimum vesting criteria. And that has been established through resolution in recent years.
Okay. Next, Bob D asks a question. If the city refuses to divest itself from the CCPA, why not consider having a sponsor for this center, much like Honda Pond or Staples Center? Would a large corporation be interested in sponsoring it for publicity?
That's a very good question. In fact, we've over the past 3 years, our theater team, led by our theater executive director at CCPA, have sought many ways of thinking creatively to enhance the revenues that come into the theater, to offset the theater's operating expenses. And one of those ideas has included naming rights. In fact, we are looking at recommendations, a policy recommendation to allow for naming rights, not only for the theater itself, the overall name of the venue, but also spaces within the theater, box seats and rooms and other spaces to help monetize the use of the venue. In addition to that, we at the theater have engaged in several other initiatives to enhance revenues. We have deployed enhanced means of seeking rentals. So not only providing or presenting our own performances, but renting the venue for private entities to present performances that are still attended by members of the public and that generate revenue for the city. We've also revamped our food and beverage service, so that's providing net revenue to the city now. And we've also focused on providing and presenting performances like the Boys to Men, our season opener last year, and other high-profile artists that are selling out, to sell out the house and provide net revenue to the city as well. So it's a multi-pronged effort, but certainly naming rights is something that we're looking at and at the right time can present that recommendation.
So we're going to have the Crypto Cerritos Center for the Performing Arts, or the Oracle Center, or the insert AI company X. We'll take it.
Well,
We'll take the AI money.
we'll seek the largest prospective donor. I
There you
also
go.
didn't mention that we recently enacted a 501(c)(3) that supports the theater. So another opportunity to receive donations, sponsorships, and donor revenue to enhance the overall revenue profile for the theater. So it's a work in progress, but we've made a lot of progress in that over the past 3 years.
Great. Okay, next question. Ada O asks, how can you make sure that Cerritos residents are informed about important matters that require our consideration, especially when it's issues like increasing sales tax? And I would say tonight might be a great example of that conversation.
It's a very good example. About a year and a half ago, the City of Cerritos adopted a strategic plan, and one of the primary goals of that plan is fiscal transparency. So the meeting we're holding tonight, similar in-person workshop that we held last week, as well as the upcoming budget study sessions with the City Council, are concrete examples of efforts to increase fiscal transparency and public engagement. We made the effort to invite all the residents of Cerritos, all property owners in Cerritos, to participate in these meetings, and we certainly appreciate all those who are logged in tonight. These are efforts on the city's part to provide clear information. We've developed the webpage that was referenced. It's cerritos.gov/future. And that's a resource where we're continuing to update the FAQs. We're providing updated documents and charts like the ones that were presented tonight as a way of engaging our residents and soliciting your input. We also have on that same page a web form where people can elaborate on and be more specific on their concerns and their hopes for the city and how it's using its resources. So we certainly invite participation through all these means, from our online format to in person. It's a great way to interact with our residents and hear directly what the concerns are and what the desires are from those we serve.
Thank you, Robert. The next question I have here is from Tenyin Lam. The question is, are there any plans to cut back some of our services that are not core to the city's residents? For this individual side, for the CCPA, for example, would be the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, so we are currently finalizing our budget to present to the City Council at the end of this month. Our first City Council budget study session is Monday, May 11th. But prior to that, our draft budget will be presented. It'll be on our website and also in the meeting agenda. And yes, we are looking at several reductions, suspensions in certain activities. Some things I can mention at this point. We are looking to recommend a reduction in programming at the theater, at the CCPA, for the upcoming fiscal year. We're also going to be recommending other reductions and suspensions, such as infrastructure. We've had for the past several years a pine tree reforestation program. The recommendation will be to suspend that for the time being. That is a general fund expense. Also, we are looking at recommending closures of facilities 1 day a week. Many residents are aware that last year, with the adoption of the current fiscal year budget, last year the decision was made to close the library 1 day a week. So we are now looking at closing other facilities 1 day a week, such as the senior center, our community centers, recreational facilities, etc., as a way of trimming our expenses while still providing those facilities for the majority of the week. So all of that will be enumerated in the draft budget that's presented to the City Council towards the end of this month.
Maybe, Robert, could you also just talk a little bit about the dual budget scenario or request from council too? Because I think that also speaks to, I see a couple questions that are lined up here that all maybe have questions about that, and we could talk about that. So there's a lot of questions I'm seeing about why not it seems like we're talking a lot about taxes and not about cuts. That's we had slides about cuts too, and we can talk about what those cuts look like. But there's this dual budget scenario is going to explore both those questions fundamentally.
Sure. So the city council has directed that we present a dual budget, essentially two budgets. Our default budget will assume no sales tax. That's the current situation. No local sales tax, no TUT. And so with that, it will include some suspension in service, some cuts, including the ones I mentioned in the answer to the last question. Uh, if a sales tax is passed, that will allow some additional revenue to help take care of some of those cuts. And so in the dual budget, we'll be presenting, if a sales tax is passed, what can be restored in terms of services. We will focus, of course, on the basics, providing essential core municipal services. But as it stands today, with our projected revenues and our projected expenses, along with the need to have a sustainable capital improvement program, we will be presenting a budget that has recommended cuts of various sorts.
Okay, thank you. That's a lot of hard work to get through. I know. Um, there's I think we answered Carla G had a question about the list only showing a select few areas and starting with public safety. I think Robert just answered that question, Carla, about not only that there's other cuts that are being discussed and those will all be presented in budget. I would also just note public safety was listed primarily because it's also one of the largest single cost centers for the city in terms of a sizable contract. And that, of course, includes LA Sheriff contract. It includes a private sector patrol service contract. It includes the Nighthawk contract that is part of a joint Lakewood Cerritos air patrol contract that exists. So those all fall into that bucket of public safety, as I understand it. And they were just itemized because those are where some big cost centers are, and it's part of the mix of services that the city provides. There's a
Okay,
question.
one thing I'll add, Ryder, if I
Yeah,
may,
please.
is we are looking at all departments. All department heads were assigned the task of looking at areas of services that we provide, and in consultation with them, we will be recommending cuts, suspension of services, programs in all areas, not just one or two departments. All departments are being impacted with our proposed budget.
Thank you, Robert. Next question. We have a question here from Peter, which is how would the Los Angeles County proposal for an increase in sales tax affect any decisions about a Cerritos specific TUT?
It's a good question. So the county has sought a legislative exemption, meaning it's not going to, the county sales tax of half a cent won't count against the cap that exists that I referred to earlier. We have a local sales tax cap of 10.75%. This proposed county sales tax will be allowed to go above that. So if there were the county sales tax proposed in the June ballot and a local Cerrito sales tax sometime in the future, potentially that total sales tax in Cerritos and in all the surrounding cities would be 11.25%. Uh, as time goes on, there could be potentially a sort of a, a cap by voters, if you will, an interest in no longer passing additional sales taxes as uh, agencies like LA County continue to get an exemption and potentially get the sales tax higher than that. We could see some voter fatigue in considering future sales tax measures. So, but right now, within this time frame, we still, even with the county half-cent sales tax, we still have the ability to capture a full 1%.
Yeah, I would just second a comment you made, which is again, this is not an endorsement of the idea. It's just a political reality in LA County. There are a number of cities that are contemplating sales tax measures, not necessarily because would they welcome the revenue opportunity, more programming for the communities? Absolutely. Would they like the financial stability? Yes. But would they also like to make sure they get a chance to get a bite at the apple before entity X or LA County or some other entity does? 100%. And I think they know there's political risk there. So they're trying to weigh those pros and cons as they evaluate the finances for their cities going forward. It's a common common debate I'm seeing among a lot of cities that I get the opportunity to work with, or just city managers, city council members I know throughout LA County and beyond. All right. There's a question here from Carla G. Is the only solution to increase or introduce taxes?
No, introducing or adding or increasing taxes is potentially part of it, but we cannot assume that is the case because all of those increases in taxes or new taxes do require voter approval. So at this point, our baseline assumption is that there are no new taxes, and we need to propose recommendations that work within our existing means. So we are recommending, as part of our dual budget framework, the default position is some cuts in expenditures, reduce services and programs in order to help make ends meet. If there is an increase in taxes and revenues, that will enable us to be fiscally sustainable over the long term. In the short term, in order to help make ends meet, we just need to reduce the scope of some of our services and programs.
I think it's also just important to note, and we may just assume people know this, but for purposes of our mission tonight to nerd everybody into local government finance nerds, um, taxes in California require voter approval, meaning if there is a sales tax measure or any other sort of tax measure, it's going to require, either depending upon the tax, a 50% plus one majority of residents who vote in favor of a particular tax, or they choose not to. That's up to the voters. Or if it's a tax that's a special tax or a tax on land, then it requires a 66% plus one, so a 2/3 supermajority to adopt that kind of tax, unless it's introduced by a citizen initiative. So, partly I just want to answer that question too, Carla G, in that ultimately the decision to tax is not that's not in the hands entirely of the city council. It's in the hands of the voters of Cerritos and every other community in LA County about how they want to handle the future of their communities. Um, there's a I'll answer this other question too, Carla, because you had a follow-up question too, which is where does the 80% of sales tax generated by non-residents come from? Where's that data point come from? So there's this company out there, a fantastic company called HDL Companies, that is based in California. They work all over the nation, but they probably work in over 300 cities in California. And to give you context, there's about 483 cities in the state. And HDL is the 800-pound gorilla when it comes to understanding sales tax and revenue sources for city governments, particularly sales tax in the state of California. They map and work on all this data all day long. So using this, they are Cerritos is a client of theirs. Cerritos works with HDL to make sure that their sales tax revenues are being properly remitted to the city. And this also provides the city with tremendous data insights into sales tax sources, where they're coming from, where those individuals are generally trending and delivering those sales tax revenues from. So that number is not a number made up by the city. It's made up by, it's defined by and analyzed by HDL companies and then provided to the city at their request. Next question. Bhavana asks, will increasing the sales tax generate more income from AutoSquare? If no, then has the city looked into the options to generate more funding from AutoSquare?
So, yes, if there's an increase in sales tax, that local transactions and use tax can result in increases to revenue to the city from auto sales. But it's a little bit of a complicated answer because auto sales are treated differently than regular taxable sales. Auto sales are based on where the purchaser lives, as opposed to where the transaction is taking place. So to the extent that Cerritos residents are purchasing in the Auto Square, that can result in an increase in revenue to the city based on car sales. But at a minimum, the city does receive from its base 1% currently uh, revenue from all sales in the Auto Square. It's that local TUT that would apply based on where people live.
Yeah. And I see Leah in asks a similar question. I think you just answered that as well. So if you recall on up here, I had a slide that talked about this current sales tax allocation at 9.75% sales tax paid. by consumers, and the city getting 1% of that. That's the 1% Robert's referring to, that when you buy your car in Cerritos Auto Mall, that 1% gets to go to the city right now, which is helping contribute to that 80% of 80% contribution from outside residents. Um, but I think that answers your question, Leah. All right. Carla G asked a question. Can we get a list of names on the budget task or people who served on the budget task force? They will be included in the report that is made public and provided to the city council. So yes, that'll be available once the report is finalized with the review of the task force members themselves. But I think we had 16 community members that were on that task force. So we appreciate their passion for local government. Let's see, next question up. Tin Yin Lam asks, I think he actually threw this one in from his wife. So he's fielding questions now from family members. They must be sitting around playing bingo with their stream tonight. How about cutting the cow or just use smaller vans, which is cheaper to operate? The
Yes.
cow. What does the cow stand for? Let's start with that, Robert.
Sure. COW stands for Cerritos on Wheels. It is a fixed route transportation bus service that's been in place since the early 1990s. And we've actually studied the cow over the past couple of years. The city commissioned an assessment of our transit services. In addition to the cow, we also operate a dial-a-ride service. That's a curb-to-curb service for seniors and residents with disabilities. So we've, over the years, assessed the needs and demand for those services. And over the past few months, the city has decided to eliminate the cow service. In fact, the final decision on that was made by the city council just earlier this month. And direction was given, and action is currently being taken to wind down the service. The last cow bus will operate on May 31st of this year. One thing I'll note about COW and Dollaride, they're both funded through those special revenues I mentioned earlier, in this case, Proposition A and C funds. These are funds that are earmarked specifically for transportation services, and we cannot use the money for anything else except for transportation. Those services are fully funded through Prop A and C, but we're at a point where we need to enter into a new contract for the service, and the cost of the new contract is outside of the revenues that we get from Prop A and C. So, in order to avoid using general fund monies for these services, we made the decision to eliminate the cow service. Those who, like the participant here, who've observed that many times of the day the cow runs empty or with very few people in it. Not the most efficient use of our limited resources. So that decision has been made, and we're currently implementing that to be in effect next month.
All I can say is, Tinian Lamb, you asked the question, you got the answer. It was a very fast policy response for you. So hopefully your wife was your wife's question. She learned something new tonight by having you participate in this. And thank you for the great question. Next question I see here, there are a couple that are popping up about kind of the cost cutting prioritization, since we answered some questions about that. So Carla's back with a question. Are you preparing a prioritization list of cuts since you're looking across every area? If so, how are you creating the prioritization?
So I alluded to this earlier. We've looked at all departments, and the cuts that are being proposed or recommended as part of the upcoming budget document, they're driven by various factors, including the strategic plan, the city's goals and priorities based on that. Also, based on feedback that we've received through many of these public engagement processes, there's actually been some ideas that have come forth that have, caused us to consider what different ways of providing services or ways that we can um, provide services in a limited fashion. So there's a variety of items that we'll be recommending. One thing I didn't mention yet is a hiring freeze. This is something that, because of limited revenues, we'll be recommending as part of the upcoming fiscal year budget to be very careful with and the timing of how our resources are used.
Thank you, Robert. there was a question asked here about how were the community members that made up the task force selected. I'm going to spare your voice for a second since you've been talking a lot, and since the task force is near and dear to my heart as the facilitator. So the city council directed the city manager to form the task force, but the city manager himself worked diligently to identify individuals in the community who had demonstrated a past history of engagement with the city and also had offered constructive criticism, I would say, of the city as well along the way, to make sure that there was a diverse set of voices around the room, so that we had a real good cross section of viewpoints and ideas. And I can attest the fact that there was disagreement in the room, disagreement among task force members. And what everybody on this call should be proud of as Cerritos residents is, despite their disagreements, they were able to engage in very healthy conversation and discourse, disagree civilly, and also just ask really probing questions. And I think the entire task force was made better off by the diversity of viewpoints and questions that were asked by the various folks in the room. So, anyways, that's how the task force came together, and it was definitely lots of differing opinions in that room about how to tackle issues and their perspectives on taxes and expenses and operations and things along those lines. Jay asks a question. Will our safety services like sheriffs and volunteers on patrol and contracted security be facing cuts? Thank you.
Thank you. As part of our budget recommendation, we are not recommending any particular modification to our sheriff's department contract. We are looking, as I mentioned, we are looking at all departments and all operations, and within our community safety budget, we are looking at specific ways of perhaps avoiding some redundant use of resources, and that'll all be included in our budget document.
Okay.
But no, there are no plans to cut resources for volunteers on patrol.
So it sounds like the LA County Sheriff's contract and the Volunteers on Patrol program are, at least at this point in time, not part of the conversation for facing cuts.
Correct.
I mean, ultimately, all these decisions come down to the city council, correct? As leaders of the city.
That's correct. So staff has worked hard to put together a budget proposal. It's a comprehensive list of account numbers and dollar figures, but all of that will be presented to the city council in public meetings, and the public has an opportunity to weigh in and provide input. Ultimately, the final decision is made by the city council.
Okay. A question here it's kind of an insider baseball terminology, but what does it mean when the city of Cerritos is described as a no and low tax city? Because that's a terminology I hear all the time, and it has a very significant impact on understanding city finances and what also makes Cerritos unique. So could you explain what that means, no and low property tax city?
Yes, so Cerritos is a no low property tax city, which means property tax collected directly by the city is virtually nothing. We do receive every year a small distribution from the county. So when property owners pay their property tax bill, there's several line items. Sometimes some properties have, for example, the school bond. There's LA County Fire has a line item on there, and there's others as well. But the base property tax that is paid, based on the valuation of the property, that goes to the county. The city receives 7% of that small property tax portion. It's a small number because at the time we incorporated, we had to negotiate with the county on property tax that at the time, all of it was going to the county as unincorporated county area. And for us and for several cities in our immediate area, the county was not willing to relinquish its rights to that property tax. So what was agreed to is getting a small distribution. It is a consistent source of revenue, and it's part of our revenue portfolio that you showed on the graph earlier, but it's not a significant portion. Some of the older cities in the county that had been around much longer than Cerritos were incorporated a lot earlier. They have a much larger property tax because at the time their negotiation with the county was more favorable. So because of that, because we are no low property tax city, we cannot increase property tax. We just get that distribution. and therefore sales tax is our primary revenue generator. Other cities in California, property tax is as a primary revenue source, but in Cerritos, sales tax is that primary source.
Yeah, and that chart that we had up earlier about kind of revenue sources is a good indicator of just how significant that is. A different question here. Actually, hang on. Let me just see. I thought I had one more question. I think I'm running out of questions. Are there any more? Let me just pause for a second and give the audience a chance to ask any more questions. And I know we're running a little short on time as it is. Give it 1 second here, Robert.
Mhm.
We had some questions about dual budget, which we've answered. There was a question here about TUT and explaining it, which we already kind of got into. I guess one related question. So I've talked a little bit about, there's a question here about who has the ability to tap into sales tax and is there a cap? So we've already answered the cap question, but I guess technically from a who can tap into sales tax revenue, what is that answer? Because it's not just a city revenue source, as I understand it.
That's correct. Currently, the sales tax, as we showed on one of the slides, is made up of there's different entities that receive it, and broadly speaking, we had city, state, and county. The county actually includes not just the county of Los Angeles particularly, but also LA County Metro. They collect a portion of the sales taxes goes to them for funding transportation services like the light rail and all the metro buses that travel throughout LA County. There's also a Regional Park Open Space District. This is an agency that administers park funding. That comes from property tax, but there are several agencies that have the ability to assess a sales tax. We've heard rumors about perhaps the fire department seeking to put something on the ballot sometime in the future. So special districts, aside from cities, have the ability to assess a sales tax.
Okay, thank you. There's a follow-on question from Evangeline about the CCPA, which is, does the city own the theater and is it fully responsible for its operating expenses? Which she denoted was 9.5% represented on one of the line items I had here in the budget.
Yes, the City of Cerritos owns the Cerritos Center for the Performing Arts. We own the property that it sits on. We own the building. So it's our responsibility to operate and maintain the building. Um, I alluded to the various departments that the city has. The theater is one of many departments. You see them on the screen. Of all the departments here, the theater actually generates a highest proportion of its expenses through revenues in the form of cost recovery. And that comes through direct ticket sales. It comes through rentals of the facility for use by private parties. And it also comes through donations. It's a three-pronged approach to our revenue for the theater. But yes, the city owns and operates it and is responsible for raising revenues to support it.
Okay, great. Um, Calvin had a question, which is, what's the deal with tree removal? Is it to further prevent street damage? Why are we taking
Yes,
out all these trees, Robert? Don't we love trees in Cerritos?
we do love trees in Cerritos. We are a Tree City, USA. We do have some trees that were installed decades ago that over the years, unfortunately, have caused damage to city property or in some cases private property. We have raised sidewalks, curbs, and gutters that not only are there tripping hazards, there's also drainage issues when it comes to flow of water. It affects the asphalt in the nearby streets. And so, several years ago, the City Council adopted a pine tree reforestation program. Pine trees are by far the trees that cause the most damage. There are other species that can be problematic, but pine trees are the most common in Cerritos. And so we do have a pine tree reforestation program. And every year we have an allotment of funding that goes into removing those trees, fixing the sidewalks and curbs and gutters adjacent to the tree, and in some cases, the nearby street. and we plant a new tree, if appropriate, in the location for to maintain our urban forest. So yes,
And
it is the purpose of the tree removal is to prevent damage, property damage, and liability for the city.
yeah, and I think the risk is if you're not staying up on that stuff, then you could incur other costs associated with those trees causing that damage. That becomes pretty expensive. So it's a balancing act between the maintenance costs on that and other services you're providing. Uh, and then any oh, okay. So a couple other questions here. These are getting very specific. We're going to run out of time, but I'm going to get to a couple. So we'll go for lightning around here. Um, there's a question about what's the net kind of operating gap between the revenues of CCPA and the ticket sales, or how much revenue it's raising on its own versus operating expense for
Yeah, for the
25,
25
26.
for the 25-26 year budget, there's about a $2.5 million gap between the budgeted revenues and expenditures for the theater department.
Okay. And has the city, if the city looked at comparable staffing levels at cities surrounding Cerritos, and what might be some factors you think about when you look at how you compare staffing at the city versus other agencies?
We don't have data readily available regarding other cities. As I alluded to in the beginning of the presentation, every city has its own services that it provides. We have, core municipal services, but there are other services where every city is unique. We have a senior center. Not every city has a senior center. We have extensive recreation programs, our pool. Not every city has a pool like ours. So we do staff our facilities according to what the need is for the hours that we operate and for the classes and programs that we provide. But we don't have data relative to other cities available.
Okay. Um, the We have some folks here that have enthusiasm for solving problems. So, just a quick question: is there anything, or has the city ever considered charging for parking at the CCPA events and other activities, say at Ironwood? I'll just say, I just last week I was there. I saw Yachtly Crew. It was absolutely amazing, a phenomenal show. My thanks to bringing Yachtly Crew to the CCPA was brilliant. And it was quite lovely that I got to park 100 yards away and walk, and I didn't have to pay to park. I was happy to pay for my ticket price and my box seat. But Robert, why should I pay? Why should I have paid for parking, or why didn't I pay for parking?
Yeah, currently free parking is one of the selling points, one of the marketing points for our theater. As you noted, other venues in the region have paid parking as the default. And so it's an amenity that we can provide. One item that complicates our ability potentially to charge for parking is that in the town center, we have shared parking access agreements among all the properties. So it need to involve some form of agreement among all the property owners, which could be problematic. We have covenants right now that restricts paid parking within the town center.
And part of the concern that would be is if if the city started charging for parking, people would just go park at the mall and occupy all the mall spots, and then there wouldn't be a place to park and eat at Wood Ranch.
That's a potential impact, yeah.
Okay, yeah, all right. Um, And is there a well, this final question? Is there a robust plan? I appreciate everybody coming in real quick with their questions here, but we're going to run a little short time. Is there a robust plan, a robust program to attract more businesses in Cerritos to generate more revenue?
Yes, one of another one of our strategic plan goals is to promote economic development in the city. We have an economic development team, including a city ombudsman, that assists new businesses with coming in the city. We've enhanced our marketing efforts in partnership with our Economic Development Commission and with our city staff, along with the leadership of our city council, in promoting Cerritos as a place to do business. We've got a new business attraction page on our website that we've promoted in several venues. So we do have staff that seek new businesses, reach out to those who've expressed interest in, for example, coming to California to help attract new sectors to the city. But we also work with our existing property owners, major owners like the Los Cerritos Center and the town center retail area and others, to work with them to facilitate them bringing in new tenants to the city. And I know we're running out of time, but I just want to briefly mention For those of you who've driven by or gone by Los Cerritos Center recently, you've probably seen some activity at the former Sears. The city recently issued a demolition permit to remove that former Sears building. We are currently working out final plans that will be presented to the Planning Commission and the City Council for a new development that will go in that place. So we're excited about what's to come. I can't publicly announce what that is, but it is something that will help to enhance our sales tax revenues for the city.
Great. Robert, you're a champion for putting up, not for putting up with, but embracing the opportunity to answer so many great questions from your residents and being for putting up with me, putting you on the spot of asking so many questions of you. So I appreciate you taking the time tonight and sharing your wisdom and expertise about all things City of Cerritos. So I'm going to bring us to a close here real quick. First of all, a reminder that we've recorded this entire session. We're going to be posting it on cerritos.gov/forward and future. And so it'll be available for anybody in the public to come rewatch this. So if you want to grab some popcorn and play local government bingo and work your way through the bingo card, it would be fantastic to host you for that conversation or for that view. And we encourage you to tell your friends to visit that website. All the content we shared today, frequently asked questions, a bunch of other materials have been pulled together, the charts that we shared, all that information is on this /future website. And I encourage you to go visit the cerritos.gov/future website as much as possible to get information, tell your friends, look for answers. There's also a feedback form there to provide feedback to council on priorities and programs that you think are sacrosanct and should be kept, and ones that you think are worthy of a strong, stern eye to consider curtailing some of the expenses in those areas. Now, notably, there's a budget study session coming up on May 11th. Robert, could you walk us through what's going to happen that night? That's a council meeting?
Yes, this is a regular city council meeting, but the primary focus will be our budget. It's a budget study session. City staff will be presenting information, overall revenues and expenditures, similar to what was presented this evening, but the numbers will be based on the new budget for the fiscal year. And we'll be seeking direction from the city council regarding priorities, and as well as input and comments from our residents and members of the community. So we invite everyone to attend, and just want to thank everyone for their participation in tonight's webinar. We appreciate all the questions that were asked, very good questions, and we look forward to more engagement in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I would say this tonight's list of Fast and Furious questions and the great showing we had online was phenomenal. This is indicative of everything I've experienced so far in Cerritos, which is a passionate community who loves Cerritos and what it offers for their quality of life, and they're passionate about the future of the community. So getting engaged in the budget issues and the fiscal future of the city is super important. And thank you for your time to join us tonight for this. Robert, I thank you very much for your time and expertise. Thank you for being here and for all your great work at the City of Cerritos and to all the Cerritos city staff that have been helping you with access to information and trying to be responsive to questions and generally helping us throughout the task force process and whatnot. I'm sure there's a hive of activity going on right now to pull together the budget because like hundreds of city halls across California, it's a very busy time for the finance department. All right, with that, we're going to bring it to a wrap. Thank you all very much. Have a great evening in the beautiful city of Cerritos.
Thank you.